For 500 years, the final resting place of King Richard III was history's greatest cold case. He was the king painted as a monster by Shakespeare, lost to time after his final brutal confrontation. Then, archaeologists found a skeleton under a city car park. But the real shock came when new AI technology scanned the bones. This advanced tech uncovered a secret hidden inside the king's skeleton for centuries, revealing a truth about his final moments that no one, not even his supporters, was ready for: the propaganda machine. So here's the deal. For 5 centuries, if you asked anyone to name history's greatest villain, King Richard III would be at the top of the list. And we have one man to thank for that: William Shakespeare. Shakespeare painted Richard as the poisonous bunch-backed toad, a man supposedly so deformed in body that he was deformed in mind. He was the original supervillain. The story we all learned is that Richard was born with teeth, a hunched back, and a withered arm. He was a monster from day one. And his list of crimes? It's a long one. Everyone's obsessed with his most famous and darkest alleged act: the disappearance of his 2 young nephews, the princes in the tower. Yeah, about that. When Richard's brother, King Edward IV, passed away, his 12-year-old son became King Edward V. He and his 9-year-old brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, were placed in the Tower of London, which was a royal residence, not just a prison to await the coronation. Richard, their uncle, was named Lord Protector. But then a shock announcement was made. A bishop claimed that Richard's brother, the old king, had been pre-contracted to another woman before he married the prince's mother. In the eyes of the church, this meant his marriage was invalid, and all his children were illegitimate. And get this, that made Richard III the only legal heir to the throne. He was crowned king. The 2 young princes, they were seen playing in the Tower Gardens, and then they vanished. Forever. The immediate assumption pushed by Richard's enemies was that he had them removed. It was the ultimate power play, a move so dark it cemented his evil reputation. But here's the catch. The Tudor dynasty, the family that defeated Richard, needed him to be a monster. Henry Tudor, who became King Henry VII, had a very flimsy claim to the throne. The only way to make his own rule look good was to make the man he overthrew look like the devil himself. This is where the story gets really dramatic. It all came to a head on August 22, 1485, at the Battle of Bosworth Field. This was the final bloody showdown of the Wars of the Roses. Richard, the King of England, versus Henry Tudor, the wannabe. Richard's army was larger, but he was surrounded by potential traitors. We'll get to that. The battle was a muddy, chaotic, brutal affair. Seeing his chance, Richard led a desperate all-or-nothing cavalry charge aimed right at Henry Tudor himself. He was trying to end the confrontation one-on-one. He failed. He was unhorsed, surrounded, and perished in the mud. After the battle, the legend says his body was treated with total disrespect. It was supposedly thrown naked over the back of a horse, paraded through the streets, and then, in the final insult, tossed into the River Soar, lost to time. This was the perfect ending for the Tudors. The monster was gone. The evidence was washed away. For 500 years, that's where the story ended. Richard was the hunchback tyrant, and his bones were mud. But what if every single part of that story was wrong? The legend of his body was about to crumble in a very modern place. A secret under the asphalt. This whole incredible story restarts not with an army, but with one woman, Philippa Langley. Langley wasn't a high-profile archaeologist or a university professor. She was a screenwriter and a member of the Richard III Society, a group of people who believed the king was a victim of a 500-year-old smear campaign. She was, in a word, obsessed. Langley didn't buy the body in the river story. It sounded way too convenient, too much like propaganda. She started digging through old maps and dusty records, and she found a competing theory, a much less dramatic one. This theory suggested that the Grey Friars, a group of monks in the town of Leicester, had taken pity on the king's body and given him a simple, hasty burial inside their church. The crazy part is that church was long gone. It was demolished in the 1500s. Over the centuries, the land was built on, paved over, and forgotten. By the 21st century, the spot where Langley's research pointed was a city council car park, a dull, gray, unremarkable slab of asphalt. In 2011, Langley visited the car park, and that's when things get weird. She was walking across the parking lot looking for the most likely spot when she says she got an overwhelming strange feeling, a shiver down her spine. She looked down and she was standing on a hand-painted letter R. It was a reserved parking spot. For her, that was a sign. She knew he was there. Of course, everyone else thought she was nuts. She went to the University of Leicester's Archaeological Service with her theory. The head of the team, Richard Buckley, was polite but skeptical. He later said the chances of finding Richard were 1,000,000 to 1. The church was huge. Finding a specific unmarked grave in a tiny trench, impossible. But Langley was relentless. She raised the money, much of it from a worldwide crowdfunding campaign of fellow Ricardians. She convinced the university. In August 2012, exactly 527 years after the Battle of Bosworth, the digging began. The team had just 3 weeks. They cut 2 long, thin trenches into the asphalt. It was a total long shot. And then the impossible happened. On the very first day, in the first trench, right where Langley had her strange feeling, the digger's bucket scraped something. The team stopped. They got on their hands and knees, and they found a human shin bone. This was stunning, but it could be anyone. A monk, a townsperson. They kept digging, carefully, with brushes. They uncovered a pair of legs, and then a torso. The body was in a grave that was too small, dug in a hurry. It was crammed in, not laid out with care. Then they uncovered the spine. The entire team just stopped. The spine was not straight. It was bent in a severe, dramatic S-curve. It was a shocking, visible deformity. This wasn't a monk. This was something else. They had found a body with a curved spine in the exact spot the Greyfriars Choir was thought to be, in the exact spot Philippa Langley said he would be. The 1,000,000 to 1 shot had just come in. The bones were carefully, almost reverently lifted and taken to a high-tech lab. The 500-year-old cold case was now active. The skeleton was a shock, but the real secrets were still locked inside. Richard's digital twin. Once the skeleton known as Burial 1 was in the lab. This is where the story goes from history to pure science fiction. The bones were taken to a high-resolution computed tomography, or CT scanner. This isn't your average hospital scanner. This is a top-of-the-line machine that takes thousands of cross-section X-ray images, each one thinner than a piece of paper. The result was a massive data file containing every single detail of the skeleton inside and out. This is where the AI comes in. This mountain of data was fed into a powerful analysis program. The AI's first job was to digitally reassemble the king. It took those thousands of slices and built a perfect, 3-dimensional digital twin of Richard III. For the first time, scientists could look at the king's skeleton in a way that was never possible. They could fly through the bones on a screen. They could twist and turn his spine. They could measure every angle, every curve, with perfect sub-millimeter precision. And the first mystery they had to solve was the big one, the hunchback. The skeleton clearly had a severe curve. So, was Shakespeare right all along? The AI analysis gave a clear answer. No. What most people don't realize is that there's a huge difference between a hunchback and what Richard actually had. A hunchback, medically known as kyphosis, is when the spine curves forward, forcing the person to be stooped over. The AI model proved, without a doubt, Richard did not have kyphosis. What he had was a severe case of adolescent-onset scoliosis. His spine didn't curve forward, it curved sideways in a dramatic S shape. This is a massive difference. The AI analysis showed that his spine twisted and his right shoulder would have been visibly higher than his left. He would have been shorter than his full height, maybe 5 feet 8 inches, which was average for a noble at the time, but he would have appeared shorter. But here's the wow factor. The AI scan of the rest of his body showed no withering at all. His arms were normal, his legs were normal and strong. This completely destroys the myth of the withered arm and the weak, deformed monster. This was a man who was fully functional. He would have been trained as a knight from childhood, wearing armor, riding horses, and fighting in battles. In fact, he was known as a formidable warrior. The AI scan suggests his scoliosis started around age 10, so he would have grown up with it. His armor, which would have weighed over 50 pounds, would have been custom-made by a master armorer to fit his unique torso. It would have been padded and built up on one side, meaning that when he was suited up for battle, almost no one would have been able to tell. The AI proved that the hunchback was a kernel of truth, the scoliosis, that his enemies, especially Shakespeare, twisted and exaggerated into a monstrous lie. The AI had debunked the 500-year-old myth, but as it continued to scan the digital bones, it started flagging other, more sinister details. The spine wasn't the only secret. The real horror was written on his skull. The wildest theories. Okay, so the AI proved the hunchback was a lie. This is huge. It means the man wasn't the monster he was painted as. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The one crime that, if true, makes him a monster anyway. The princes in the tower. If Richard didn't do it, then who did? This is where the wild theories come in, and they are incredible. Theory 1, the Shakespeare story. Richard did it. This is the simple classic version. Richard was power-hungry. The boys were a threat. He had them removed to secure his throne. The motive is strong, and he had the most access. It's the story the Tudors pushed, and it's the one that stuck. Theory 2, the Buckingham betrayal. This one is juicy. What about Henry Stafford, the Duke of Buckingham? He was Richard's right-hand man, the guy who helped him get the throne. But get this, Buckingham had his own distant claim to the throne. Just a few months after Richard was crowned, Buckingham led a massive rebellion against him. So, what's the theory? That Buckingham had the princes dispatched for two possible reasons. Either to frame Richard, make him look like a monster and inspire people to rebel, or to clear the way for his own claim. Richard captured and executed Buckingham for his treason. But was the treason also the murder? Theory 3, the Tudor twist. This is a dark one. What if the princes were still alive when Richard perished at Bosworth? What if Henry Tudor, the new King Henry VII, found the boys, still locked in the tower? Think about it. The boys were a bigger threat to Henry than they ever were to Richard. Richard was their uncle. Henry was from a rival family. Their claim to the throne was 1,000,000 times stronger than his. What most people don't realize is that Henry had a massive motive to get rid of them and blame it on the dead king. It's the perfect crime. Commit the act yourself and pin it on the monster you just overthrew. Theory 4, the Great Escape and the Imposter Prince. This is the wildest and most fascinating theory of all. What if the princes weren't dispatched? What if they were smuggled away? Years later, after Richard was gone and Henry VII was king, a young man appeared in Europe. He claimed to be Richard of Shrewsbury, the younger of the two princes, escaped from the tower. His name was Perkin Warbeck. And get this, he was convincing. He looked the part. He had royal manners. He was officially recognized as the real prince by the King of Scotland, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the King of France. They gave him money, armies, and even a royal wife. He led multiple invasions of England before he was finally captured by Henry VII. Henry, of course, called him a fraud, a simple boatman's son from Belgium, and eventually had him executed. But was he? Or was Henry VII just tying up the last loose end? Did he execute the real heir to his throne? We still don't know. The historical records are a mess. The bones of Richard III, however, can't solve this mystery. But they can solve the next one, his final brutal moments. The prince's fate is a mystery, but Richard's final battle is a cold, hard case. The halberd and the dagger. The AI analysis of the skeleton wasn't just about the spine. Its next job was to become a digital coroner and reconstruct Richard's final desperate moments. First, you have to understand the scene at the Battle of Bosworth. Richard was in a trap. A huge part of his army was controlled by Lord Thomas Stanley. Stanley was a powerful northern lord, but he was also Henry Tudor's stepfather. It's not that simple, though. To keep Stanley loyal, Richard was holding Stanley's son hostage. So when the battle began, Stanley and his thousands of men, a huge chunk of the army, just sat on a hill. They didn't move. They just watched. Richard was being double-crossed. He knew he was done for, so he made a Hail Mary move. He saw Henry Tudor's banner across the field. He gathered his personal guard, about 80 knights, and led a frantic, desperate cavalry charge right at Henry. He was trying to end it, right then and there. This is where the AI forensic scan tells us what happened. He was unhorsed, surrounded, and it was over. The AI scanned the digital skeleton for every single bit of trauma. It found 11 distinct wounds, all sustained around the time of his passing. 9 of them were to his head. This wasn't a single noble blow. This was a frenzy. The AI model of the skull lit up with damage markers. There were multiple glancing blows from swords, slicing his scalp to the bone. But he was wearing a helmet. So how did this happen? The AI analysis combined with historical accounts suggests his helmet was torn from his head during the attack. Once his head was bare, the real terrible injuries happened. The AI isolated 2 massive fatal blows. The first was to the base of his skull. A huge, terrifying chunk of bone was just gone, sheared clean off. The AI analyzed the clean, sharp edges. This wasn't a sword. This was a halberd, a terrifying 7-foot-long poleaxe with a heavy blade and a spike. It's basically a medieval tank killer. The AI model showed the blow came from above and behind. It would have been instantly fatal. This was the one that ended the king. But the attack didn't stop. The AI found a second terrible wound. A smaller, sharper weapon, probably a dagger or a sword, had been thrust completely through the right side of his skull from one temple to the other. And perhaps the most grim, the AI flagged humiliation injuries. These were not injuries sustained in combat. After he was down, someone had taken a dagger and thrust it into his right jaw and his right buttock. These were acts of pure hatred, of desecration on the body of the fallen king. The AI scan proved, in chilling detail, that Richard had perished in a brutal, frenzied assault. He was a king, and he was torn apart like an animal. But was it even him? The spine was a clue. The injuries fit the story. But they needed one final, absolute piece of proof. The AI had shown how he passed, but it couldn't confirm who he was. The Roman nail. This was the final hurdle. The skeleton looked like Richard. It was in the right place. But they needed irrefutable scientific proof. They needed DNA. But how do you get DNA from a 500-year-old skeleton? And who do you match it to? This is where the story gets even more incredible. Years before the dig, a historian named John Ashdown Hill had been working on the same puzzle. Richard had no living descendants, but the historian traced Richard's family tree up and over, following the maternal line of Richard's eldest sister, Anne of York. Mitochondrial DNA, or mDNA, is special. It's passed down only from a mother to her children, almost unchanged. Ashdown Hill followed that unbroken female line for 19 generations, down through history, until he found a living relative, a woman named Joy Ibsen, a Canadian journalist who had no idea she was related to a lost king of England. Sadly, Joy passed away in 2008, but her son, Michael Ibsen, gave a DNA sample. Back in the lab, scientists carefully drilled into the skeleton's tooth, one of the best preserved parts. They extracted a tiny fragmented sample of ancient DNA. This was the moment of truth. The AI-assisted genetic mapping went to work. They compared the ancient mDNA from the tooth to the mDNA from Michael Ibsen. It was a perfect match. The skeleton in the car park was King Richard III. The team was stunned. They had done the impossible. But here's one more wild theory. While the maternal DNA was a perfect match, the team also tried to check the paternal Y chromosome DNA. They found living descendants of Richard's family on his father's side. And guess what? The DNA didn't match. And that's putting it lightly. This was a bombshell. It means that somewhere in those 19 generations, there was what scientists politely call a false paternity event. Someone's father wasn't who they thought he was. Does this mean the skeleton isn't Richard? No. The mDNA match, the scoliosis, the battle injuries, the location, it's all too perfect. It just means that royal bloodlines are a lot messier than the history books tell us. With the identity confirmed, the AI had one last job. Using the perfect three-dimensional scans of the skull, a team of forensic artists began a facial reconstruction. The AI helped layer digital muscles and tissue onto the bone structure, following the exact contours of the skull. A face that hadn't been seen in 500 years slowly emerged. And it wasn't the face of a monster. It wasn't Shakespeare's tyrant. It was the face of a man in his 30s with a prominent chin and a thoughtful expression. It was just a face. Oh, and one last thing. During the dig, they found a small piece of metal between his vertebrae. For a second, the team thought it was an arrowhead. A new mystery. Was he shot in the back? The AI scan ended that theory fast. It analyzed the object's shape and density. It wasn't an arrowhead. It was a simple, badly made Roman nail. It was just a piece of trash in the dirt left over from a building 1,000 years before Richard was even born. The AI had saved them from starting a whole new myth. Outro. The AI scans proved he wasn't a hunchback. But does that change your mind? Was Richard a victim of propaganda or a ruthless tyrant who got what he deserved? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.